Good afternoon, everybody. This is Neil Conlon from AppGuard. Apologies here for our late start. We had a little bit of technical difficulties with some of the webinars that we're using. The beautiful thing about technology is that when it works, it's amazing. And then obviously we all know that sometimes it just doesn't work the way that we want it to. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day in order to join our webinar. I'm very excited to be able to put this webinar on. We do these monthly. We tend to make them very industry specific, and AppGuard has had a very interesting run with the use cases that are often used specifically in law firms, real estate firms, banking, and accounting firms as well. So I'm joined today by Avi Gesser, a partner at Debevoise and Plimpkin, and Douglas Brush, the VP of Cybersecurity Solutions and Special Counsel. So just to go through Avi's bio a little bit, and Doug's a little bit as well. Avi's a cybersecurity litigation partner at Debevoise and Plimpkin. He's a member of Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Group and the White Collar and Regulatory Defense Group. He's got extensive experience in advising a wide range of cybersecurity matters, incident response, and data security and strategy concerns. Doug has a background in information security over 26 years and has been serving as a CISO and leading enterprise security assessments, as well as trade secret theft, employee maleficence, and a variety of other legal and compliance matters. He also serves as a federally appointed special master and neutral expert in high-profile litigation matters. So one thing that I think is very interesting, and then I'll turn it over here to the guys to talk a little bit about their background and what that actually means, is I remember a time not too long ago, and I'm sure Doug and Avi, you do as well, where it must have been like 7 or 8 years ago that when a law firm got a phone call from somebody saying, hey, I think I've been breached, I think I've been compromised, I think I've been hacked, I think my data's been gone, and I need to seek legal counsel. I think every lawyer that I used to know would say, no, we don't do that. But I know law firm by himself, that's the only thing he does. I can refer you out to somebody because that's some weird shit that people do. And it wasn't that long ago that that was the case for everybody. And now I think, you know, in the past 7, 8 years, if you're going to maintain your cybersecurity, your legal practice, you have to have expanded into having a very detailed cyber practice as well. And you see companies like Special Counsel and Debevoise and Plimpkin being those type of firms that have very deep knowledge base and thought processes there. Avi, Doug, before we get into it, what do you guys think about, you know, that kind of future or future planning of what cybersecurity has become for law firms? Avi, let's start with you. You might be muted. Avi, can you hear us? Doug, are you on?
I am on, so I can certainly address it. Yeah, I think you're right. You know, there's been a change finally happening. You know, I think for those of us that have been in technology and cybersecurity for the scarily as long as some of us have been, is that we are kind of having this emperor has no clothes moment where we're saying cybersecurity is not just a technology problem. It's not just an IT problem. There's a lot of legal ramifications that go with it. So whether it be, you know, a law firm providing advice to clients on the outside or their outside clients on what's going on, or even taking a look at their internal needs, there's a lot that goes into cybersecurity risk management governance that have legal ramifications. And we are past a state where people can kind of bury their heads in the sand and think that doesn't matter. With 50 states having different reporting requirements, things like the FTC and OCR and the HIPAA, new regulations like CCPA and GDPR, we're far past that point where people can say, well, I can use a generalist in this. This really requires specialized attention and kind of skill set to deal with both the legal and technology. And there's a huge intersection of that where, the legal guidance that needs to occur in this is just as important if you're getting into complex litigation. You'd want to find a specialist that has that track record and done it, because there's just so many pitfalls and landmines if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yep. Yeah, completely agree with you, Doug. Completely agree with you. Avi, did you
Yeah,
get in
can
there?
you hear me now?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, look, I think the law firms have realized if we're going to be providing clients with advice on just their risk and emergencies and so forth, this is going to be a big part of what our clients are going to need, predicting sort of where regulation is going, but just responding to incidents. And firms like Devoice, which has a good white collar practice and a good sort of advisory crisis management practice, makes sense to bolt on to that the cyber practice, and that's what we're doing here. And then taking what we've learned from the incidents, and then feeding it back to our advisory practice and helping our clients figure out ways to hopefully avoid some of the problems that they're seeing, on the incident side.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate it. And I mean, like, I read only a little brief piece of each of your bios because they're both very, very extensive. I mean, you're both subject matter experts in the space. Maybe let's go back over to Doug and then over to Avi. But for the folks on this call who probably are in similar either law firms or even in similar roles, let's just dig in and peel back the onion a little bit into like what it is you exactly do at your firm, what the role is like, and what are some of the biggest challenges that you're seeing, as we roll through 2020. Doug, how about you?
Yeah, sure. That really what I'm focused now on with special counsel. So special counsel being the leading kind of legal advisory arm of the Adecco Group. And I was brought in to build a cybersecurity practice because we certainly saw, from legal consulting, you can't ignore the cyber and risk factors anymore. And for the past several years, I've been on the front lines of incident response and data breach investigations, where often I'd be the first phone call from a client or a CISO saying, "Hey, look, we have a data security incident. Can you roll your team in?" And we would. And while I was doing a lot of that frontline work, the question that inevitably came to the end of the investigation was, okay, well, who was impacted? Again, with these different state reporting guidelines or international and different regulatory portions of it, there needed to be a list of people that were impacted by these investigations. And so we really had struggled doing that. So I kind of came over to special counsel to use some of the e-discovery tools and software to really basically do sophisticated data mining, because at the end of the day is, and we'll probably touch on this later, there's not only is there more regulatory scrutiny, but there's the timelines to notify in 30, 45, 60 days. All of a sudden, with huge data sets and large business email compromise and cloud compromises, where you can, where before, when we had maybe one exchange email box on-prem compromised, could be a handful of people. Now we're seeing complete mailbox environments or Office 365 environments getting taken down with multiple mailboxes and hundreds of thousands of individuals that have to be notified in a very short timeline. So we basically spend most of the day trying to do this complex investigations and data mining to who has to be notified.
Yeah, and aside from helping my law firm get better at this internally and make sure that we are as secure as we can be, because law firms are obviously targets of these attacks. And I just read this morning there's some ransomware that's been hitting law firms recently. But for our clients, there's a lot of regulation out there. There's a lot of different threats. They are hearing about phishing and ransomware and all these other things. And for the tech folks, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But for everybody else, legal, compliance, risk, the business folks, some of whom don't have a very strong technical background, helping them to figure out, what they can and should be doing, what they're responsible for, and all the sort of non-technical pieces of cybersecurity. So training, and compliance programs and policies and procedures, and making sure that they understand the legal risks and that they've got their disclosure issues and their insider trading issues squared away, and that they're thinking about cyber both as a technical issue, but also as a risk issue from a regulatory compliance, litigation risk, liability to clients, and sort of doing everything you can ahead of time to sort of prepare for an incident and be ready to respond in a way that is, will have minimal impact.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's super interesting. It's a super interesting conversation because, last year, what I found, through all of my travel, last year I did about a little over 200,000 miles on an airplane around the globe. And, I've been doing cybersecurity now for quite some time in different capacities. But now you're seeing this, like, I don't know, and you guys could probably dig in here better than I can. This is what you do, but it's almost like there's this trifecta now, or trinity almost, where you have the IT infrastructure architecture person. Sometimes that's your CTO, but then you've got to bring in a CISO or a BISO or an information security person, because they're looking at it from this attack vector, vulnerability, incident response perspective. But then, because of all of the movement to the cloud and where all the different places where this data is stored, it's not so much just as, hey, this thing was, a hole was put into this container and something leaked out of it. It becomes about what is the legal ramifications for it, and ultimately, who is responsible for the cleanup, the risk, the nuts and the bolts of the whole thing. So, what do you guys think about like that around this whole trinity now of, this is not only just a cyber problem, this is not only just a technology problem, this is not only just a legal problem, but it's the full gambit. Where do you guys get involved in that conversation?
So this is Avi. You're exactly right. It's not just cybersecurity; it's privacy, and there's state regulations and federal regulations, and the threat actors are becoming more sophisticated. And every year, companies have more data to protect. They've got more devices connected. They've got their data in more different places. And as you point out, there's all sorts of cloud risk and so forth. And so, what we try to do is help clients sort of prioritize issues, think strategically, benchmark against what other people are doing, and then as we see vulnerabilities being exposed, alerting our clients to, hey, listen, one of our clients just experienced this particular attack, and so you got to make sure that you patch this software, or that your help desk is aware of this scam. And so it's really this sort of constant interaction where we're taking what we learn and looping it back to our clients, and hoping to stay ahead of the bad guys, which is tough.
Yeah, and certainly along those points, I try to advise my clients, look, cybersecurity is hard, but it's not impossible. And you really do need to have a strategic approach. And I think many organizations feel it's just, there's a couple aspects really to unpack. That one, that they may not be a target. And the reality is everybody's a target now in just about every industry. There's some way to monetize an attack, whether it be ransomware, business email compromise, wire fraud, credential theft, data theft. Attackers know how to monetize their efforts very well, and they're very efficient, and they're well organized. So just about everybody's, a target. But again, that doesn't mean that it's impossible. There's just pragmatic things that you have to do to understand your industry, the types of threats that you face, and prioritize mitigation efforts in the most effective way. You know, we're trying to go with that 80-20 rule of, you know, what's the 20% of the things I can do that can reduce my attack surface area by 80%? And there's a lot that can be, and it's a lot of times it's just basics, and it's just getting people around that mentality of building a program that's going to continually improve and put the effort and resources behind it. And that's really what we try to do, is steer people towards. And again, no industries, that doesn't, you know, it applies to every industry. And I've certainly seen with, you know, when we talk about law firms, these law firms for a long time thought, hey, geez, you know, we're not targets. We don't have credit card data. And I'm just like, nobody cares about credit card data anymore. They care about getting in and getting your intellectual property for your clients. Like, I'm not going to sit there and try to attack Boeing. Boeing's got really good defenses. I can go into Pacer and public record systems, find out who their outside counsel is doing deals, and I would attack the law firms. Low hanging fruit. So deal data, IP data, things that are out there, law firms have it, and they're things that attackers are going to go after. So there's value in them data. So they will continue to attack it.
Yeah, yeah. You raise an interesting point, and I mean, I think even the way that you say it is like, you know, people who are good at this, and it's becoming very easy to become good at this, right? Are know how to monetize information. So they're obviously not going to go for the big banks any longer, or the governments, unless they're a state nation. They're going to go for low hanging fruit. So, question for you guys. You know, what are the leading attack vectors that you think are impacting the law firms the most?
So, I mean, this is Abby. I think the classic, which is going to still be a risk for the foreseeable future, is just phishing, right? It's just being able to get people to either download a malicious file onto their system, onto their phone, onto their home computer, onto their work computer, or give up their login credentials to somebody, and then using that to do whatever, to deliver ransomware, to exfiltrate data, to do what, you know, that's still the number one, I think, risk, and it's very, very hard to deter. And that's why this isn't really just an IT problem. That's why it's everybody in your organization has to really be vigilant, and why phishing training is really important. Why there's a bunch of, you know, technical issues that you can, you know, color coding emails and blocking certain domains, and it's like an ongoing fight. But, you know, I think that's still, you know, ground zero.
I would agree with Avi on that. You know, we still see about 90% of attacks start with phishing. Doesn't have to be elegant. You know, when we talk about things like 0-day attacks that are well crafted, things that are not known in the wild, attackers aren't going to burn those resources. They're going to go with the path of least resistance. And if they can get somebody to click on an email, they'll do it. It's just an easy way for them to get inside environments, launch payloads, do credential harvesting, and continue to get in. And so, you know, we certainly see most of the attacks really start with phishing. And that will be to launch other types of attacks, whether again be wire fraud or ransomware. And there's still a lot of organizations with weakened perimeters. Doesn't mean that you can only focus on one area, but I've seen quite a bit of remote desktop protocol or RDP attacks where attackers will go in where there's no multi-factor authentication. They can get on an environment, launch attacks against servers, and take people down to their knees within a number of hours until ransom demands are paid. So that still continues to be a threat that's out there.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting because with some of our law firm clients, what I think is pretty scary from a cyber perspective is, you know, legal and law just being one of probably the U.S.'s most well established industries, meaning that it's been done the same way for, you know, hundreds of years. Um, that now means that like everybody is mostly comfortable with like that's just the way it's always been. We've always done our filing that way. We've always done our representation that way. And that creates a need for kind of disruptive strategies because even though law is so established, cybersecurity is this ever evolving monster that has yet to have a benchmark to it or yet to kind of stabilize, and it still continues to grow and change, and the attack surfaces are changing, and the way people are changing, the way people attack are changing. So, what are some of the differences that you guys are seeing, from, does the strategy change, I guess, from a large law firm to a small law firm? What are you guys seeing out there?
Yeah, and so I mean, to your first point, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, lawyers are used to, being able to give advice to clients very quickly, working at all hours, traveling a lot, collaborating with other people, moving lots of documents around, and so it's a particularly risky environment for cybersecurity because people don't want to compromise efficiency for security. They're used to dealing with things a certain way, and even if you get slowed down by 5 minutes because of some security feature, that can be a problem when you're trying to respond quickly to a client's demand and so forth. And so when you're crafting solutions, you have to be careful not to make it too burdensome, because then people will find some workaround which makes it even less secure. They'll be sending stuff to their Gmail account or whatever. And so the security folks have to work very closely with the business folks to make sure that the security measures that they're implementing aren't going to be too burdensome, and that people are going to adopt them and they're going to be effective. And some of them are very costly, but a lot of them aren't. First of all, there's a lot of software out there that's relatively cheap and is quite good. But a lot of it is also just training and awareness. I mean, one of the things I think is most valuable for a law firm is to have somebody, a help desk person who's knowledgeable, that people can call, when they're at an airport and ask, is it okay for me to connect to the Wi-Fi? I just downloaded something that I'm not sure if I should have, and have someone friendly and helpful that they can call anytime and ask questions for, makes a big difference in terms, because people don't want to get yelled at if they do something wrong, and they often don't know who to ask. And so if you can designate someone, that can help a lot too. And there's also color coding emails so that external emails look different than internal emails, so that when people are spoofed emails, you can sort of see who's who. And blocking domain names that look like your domain name but are slightly different. And just doing good phishing training is all things that are relatively cheap that can make a big difference.
Yeah, again, I couldn't agree with Avi further. It's one of those things, particularly with law firms, where you have to create that culture where they feel it's okay to report things. I've certainly seen law firms have kind of a contentious relationship between partners, associates, and IT, and different people wanting different things at different times. So prioritization of resources is always a challenge. So partners might not feel sometimes welcome in the IT realm, but they're the ones being targeted. They're the ones that, when we talk about whaling, larger phishing targets, they're the ones that attackers are going to go after, and they need to feel comfortable reporting things. So when I've gone into law firms and done training for individuals within inside the law firm, it's funny to go back and do a refresher 6 months or a year later and find that the culture has changed. And I kind of tune it a little bit towards type A personalities. So where different partners wanted to be the first ones to report phishing, and they use that as like a competitive thing. They say, well, I did it before you did. I'm like, if that works for you guys, great. If that's where you're so driven to be number one, great. But if it's changing the culture and reducing risk, find ways to leverage that. There's a lot that has to happen internally with inside organizations to make that connection that things are reportable, how to report it, having a good plan and policy in place so people feel that it's okay to report these things.
Right. I don't know. I find it very funny, the whole world of phishing training and testing, because there's so many ways to socially engineer that conversation, to where, like, I really am a huge fan of what the tool KnowBe4 is doing in the realm of being a good phishing tester. But just to give a good example, it's like, guess what? If an email went out on Thursday to everybody at your firm saying that we're giving away free tickets to the Super Bowl, all you got to do is click here, I bet you 90% of the organization would have done it, right? Just for FOMO. And if a phishing email went out this morning saying which performance was better, Shakira or J-Lo's, pick. We're taking a poll. Click here. There goes the other 10% of the organization as well. So I think there just needs to be a little bit more. To your point, it's about this culture thing, right? The culture around it and what we're really trying to achieve. Are we trying to trap people into clicking things so we can go, hey, guess what? The cyber guy actually clicked on that J-Lo is better than Shakira. Or are we really trying to alter and tweak and transform the culture into making sure that everybody understands that we're all on the same page and we have a well outlined cybersecurity strategy that's been vetted by the technologists, it's been vetted by the cyber folks, and it's been vetted by the legal teams to kind of de-risk as much as we can.
Yeah, look, I agree. You're never going to get 100% compliance, especially on clicking on links or PDFs or something like that. You can get, most people to be careful, but you're not going to get everybody, especially on phones and stuff like that. So you need a software solution that's going to protect you for that. I think, with good training, I think you can get people not to, let's say, respond to a request that is from IT asking for your username and your password, where it's, if you looked at it, you'd realize it's from an external email. Like that stuff I think you can make progress on, or training people not to take USB drives that they find on the street and plug it into their work computers, right? Which, happens, right? If people leave USB drives that say, concert footage or something like that. Oh, that's interesting. So, but that you can train. So I think it's, again, you got some of this is right, really IT stuff, but also some of this is about regulatory compliance, right? And you want to be able to show, if you have an incident, you want to be able to show your regulators that, we tried everything. We tried software, we tried training, we tried policies, we tried procedures. And so, you're demonstrating you took this seriously, even though you recognize that you're never going to get 100% compliance with what you're trying to achieve.
Right. Yeah, it's very, very interesting, the cybersecurity culture piece of it, and how the impact of it from just a culture or digital transformation perspective is. I did forget something in the beginning intro here. So for anybody who's listening on the webinar, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask specifically, go ahead and hop over to, on my app, it says questions, it could say chat. Feel free to ask those questions directly in there, or feel free to private message them to me, and we'll be asking them along the webinar as well. I just want to make sure that we have that open line for folks if they'd like to ask any direct questions. All right, so as far as things that are on the horizon, right? I'm sure that you guys have some interesting access or some interesting conversations. So is there things that are on the horizon that folks should be listening or paying attention to from your perspectives?
This is Doug. I could certainly say, continue to kind of watch out for ransomware that is evolving. A few years ago, we saw ransomware continue to just be kind of a drive-by attack, meaning they would send out a bunch of spam phishing emails, help a couple people click. It would lock up maybe one computer. You have to pay a couple $1,000s to get that back. We've seen it evolve to $6 and $7 million or 6 to 7 figure ransom demands, where they have been inside the systems and the IT environment for several weeks. So if you think what an attacker can do, they're gathering lots of information. They might be taking sensitive data out and posting it online if you don't pay them. So they've gotten more sophisticated in their attacks and the attack toolkits they're using. And it's just, again, it's being something that can monetize very well, and continue to use. And secondarily, it's business email compromise, doing wire fraud. It's such an easy thing to kind of get inside that environment, build trust, and get individuals to send wires. And I've worked with a number of law firms that have been subject to victims of this, where they've wired out hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's never gone to the intended recipient. So that is something that is just not going to slow down. So again, just kind of follow the money.
Yeah, and I think, one of the big shifts that we're probably going to see this year is that there's going to be increased enforcement from regulators and increased sort of litigation risk for victims of cyber attacks. I think for a long time people thought, you're a victim of a cyber attack, and so we're not going to pile on and punish the victim. And I think the regulators and the judges and who are watching think that no, companies need more incentive to do better in protecting their customer and their employees' data, and we need to, be more aggressive, because even though it's been 5 or 6 years, there's still a lot of companies who aren't doing what they need to be doing. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of, we're starting to see it in Europe, and we're starting to see it in the US in some places where companies that were the victim of a cyber attack are getting in trouble for not having done sufficient training, policies, procedures, technical controls, and really basic things like help desk fraud. I think is going to become more and more of a problem, where you just have somebody pretending to be executive calling up the help desk and saying, I lost my phone. I need you to email this to me, to my Gmail account, or I lost my phone and I want, send me new credentials, or, I'm the chief executive and I need you to email me this or that. Like, that stuff is pretty basic, but if someone's good at it, which a lot of these people have become very good at it, that, can be incredibly effective. And that's just a straight training issue. You got to have people know that the person who's calling may not be who they say they are. You really need to do a good job of authenticating. Doesn't matter how much they yell, how much they threaten you. This is a risk that you need to. It's your job to make sure they are who they say they are.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's interesting how much more complicated these type of attacks have gotten. It's very, very interesting. All right, so
and there's so much.
Go ahead.
I was saying, there's so much data out there, public data. Like, if I wanted to pretend to be you, Neil, or you, Doug, and call up I could get a lot of information, including address and date of birth and kids' names and everything. And so you need an authentication system that is pretty good, because now there's so much publicly available information out there. It's very easy to pretend to be somebody.
It also doesn't help that I'm as active as I am on social media either. So point well made. All right, so I've got a message here. Somebody PM me a question here. It's very costly and very expensive to think of what it would be like to protect all of our information. What is the mission critical information that we should be protecting in our business?
So this is Doug. One of the things I like to do when I go in and do security assessments is literally ask that organization, because it is kind of bespoke and personal, how do you keep the lights on? What are your critical business functions? What are the IT systems that support it, and focused on those, and then move outward. You're right, you're not going to secure every aspect of your organization, but every organization is going to be different in how they monetize their information and communicate both internally and externally, whether you're business to business, business to consumer. There's some mechanism in which you're using information systems, and you need to figure out ways to protect them. There's obviously going to be the basics, like having inventory, knowing what you have, and then starting there, because you can't protect what you don't know about. So you really have to start with that most basics and doing inventory. And that's not necessarily going to cost you anything more than time and maybe burning out some weekends building those inventory lists. But after you have that and you map them to business functions, start there. Make sure you have things like multi-factor authentication on VPNs in your email. Just those couple steps right there are going to help reduce your attack surface area quite a bit without a huge spend.
And you have to think about, things have changed in terms of what are your crown jewels. What is the most important piece of data that you're going to protect? And because you have to think about it, both what's valuable to you and then what's valuable to someone else. and then what would you be harmed by if it was leaked, right? So, and those are different questions, but they, so for example, your CEO's emails may not be that valuable to the company, but it might be very valuable to somebody who takes them and then wants to ransom them. And so that may be something that you don't think of as being your crown jewels. It's not necessarily your trading formula, or it's not necessarily, inside information about a corporate deal, but it may be embarrassing enough or sensitive enough that you need to protect it, because in the hands of someone else, it could be quite damaging. And the other thing I would say about all this is the amount of data that you collect and that you keep is just unsustainable for most organizations. It's just doubling every couple of years, and it is incredibly costly. And a lot of companies are starting to get very serious about data minimization, about trying to be more careful about what data they actually take in, and taking in less data or less sensitive data, and then trying to get rid of it as quickly as they can. And so they're not keeping too much data, and then looking at the data that they have, old servers, old emails, old SharePoints, and saying, do we really need this? Can we get rid of it? As a way to try and manage the risk, and not having to protect everything.
Yep. Yeah.
I was just going to say that, as data gets older, the value of it probably goes down or diminishes or stays the same, while the risk just continues to increase by having it. Get rid of what you don't need. There's always that fear of, I might need it later. Maybe not, and probably most of the time not. And it just becomes a harder thing to deal with when you have to even find that data. Most people don't have systems in place that they can even search large terabytes of data within inside their organization anyway. So the value just continues to decrease. And that along those lines, you still have to think of insider threat information. You have people that are trusted with inside your environment. Again, we want to trust the employees and our colleagues, but things can happen, and you don't want to have too much data with too much access to individuals that could potentially take things and leverage it in ways that you don't want it against your own business.
Yeah, and older data is sometimes on older servers, and those are the ones that are more vulnerable. They're harder to patch, right? And so, just because it's old doesn't mean it's not a problem. In some ways, the older it is, the more it's going to be inexplicable to somebody if it gets taken. Why did you have it in the first place? And you want to sort of start thinking to yourself, like, if we don't need this data, is it more of a risk to have it than to get rid of it?
Right. It's very, very interesting to me, because I remember, and it's not even that long ago, where because of the ability to monetize data in some capacity, and it was growing so quickly, that everybody was doing a land grab to try and collect every single piece of data that they could. They wanted foot traffic data, they wanted age, race, creed, color, gender, favorite, I don't know, sneaker type, everything and anything. And then as soon as the foundation for GDPR started to show itself, and to your point, right, people were accumulating all this data with not really understanding the true, if any, value to it, and all they were doing really was increasing the amount of risk that they had to mitigate, and probably the cost to manage it, maintain it, and house it. And now I see that often now, where I see companies, even when I subscribe to newsletters, being much more thoughtful in what data they're going to collect, how they're going to share with you, how they're actually going to use it, and if and when, how to get rid of it very, very quickly, and promise you that if you click a certain box and opt out in a certain way, they're going to delete it and never use it ever again. But that wasn't that long ago that it wasn't like that.
Yeah, and it was like that because people were worried about regulatory risk and litigation risk of getting rid of large volumes of data. Like somehow that's going to be, I've got a legal hold for something. I don't know what's in here. I mean, I'm afraid to get rid of anything because it might be subject to the legal hold, and there might be some regulatory reason for keeping it. And I may need to use the data someday for some, machine learning AI tool. And I think, the privacy risk and the cyber risk is causing companies to be much more thoughtful about that, to really sort of ask themselves, like, do I really need this data? Am I really going to use it? Can I just buy this data if I need it? Can I take a sample and get rid of the rest? Do I really need all of it? What's the incremental value of it? You know, can I anonymize it at least? Do I really need all that personal information in there? You know, really get into that question and then say, okay, what's the upside of all that, and what's the downside of me having it? How much does it cost to protect it? You know, and what does that mean a year from now, 2 years from now? And you know, that's a data strategy question that's really only come up in the last couple of years, but it's a question a lot of companies are facing.
Right. Sure. Sure. Absolutely. So I've got another question here that someone sent to me directly. Oh, this is going to be fun. This is going to actually be kind of funny. So I'm guessing it's from a CEO. He says, I'm going to be asking my CISO this afternoon after this webinar what his 3 best practices are. What are your guys' 3 best practices to recommend to CISOs that they can implement? We might get somebody in trouble on this one, but we're going to do it.
This Doug, you know, it's the basics. Look, we're coming up in a couple weeks now to RSA, and probably everybody in this call does well off of, you know, consulting and product with inside that space. But the reality is most organizations still need to get their basics together. Inventory, knowing what you have, then building patch management around that. So you can make sure as new vulnerabilities are discovered, you have not just the ability to identify that information, those systems with those vulnerabilities, but a way to deploy patches with good change management. So there's a little bit of a change management aspect that goes in with that. So in case you, for example, patch something and it breaks something, you can roll it back. And then the third really being multi-factor authentication in as many places as you can, particularly around privileged accounts such as admin accounts.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I really like very low tech solutions like color coding emails on your phone and on at work, so that you can tell the difference between external and internal emails. Blocking domain names like, you know, like that have a 0 instead of an O, so it looks like it may be from your organization and it isn't from your organization. And to me, I think, you know, just the message from senior management that, you know, this isn't a tech issue. This is a firm-wide enterprise risk issue, and everybody needs to play their part. And we can't be over-reliant on IT is really, really important. And then have the IT folks, you know, being more involved in understanding how people actually use their systems, how they actually work, and having a sort of more integrated approach to it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating how no matter how sophisticated we're getting, everyone that I speak to seems to always give just go back. You got to master the basics first. And there's also something that I've seen evolving. I think it happened a lot in the end of last year, where I can remember AppGuard CEO coming to us and saying, "Hey, we're seeing some online chatter about the attack Emotat making a resurgence, and what we're seeing is that when some of these more sophisticated attacks happen that have very unique signatures to them, or very unique IOCs, the indicator of the compromise, they actually become very easy or easier to arbitrage or triage within a couple of days. So the attack manifests itself. Microsoft can patch it, Apple can patch it in their own way, but you now have this resurgence of brute force and persistent attacks like Emotat and others that are going into these new infrastructures that came out of the box, with all the cool futuristic stuff, but to your guys' point, can make it through the basics, knowing that most organizations have not done their due diligence or taken the time to really make sure that they stick to their basics. So definitely
Yeah.
love the fact that you guys are both on the same page there.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
and I'm going to add one more,
Oh, go ahead.
on that, which is threat sharing, right? So,
Yes, I was about to say the same.
yeah, exactly. I mean that
Yep.
you got to be talking to your peers, joining a threat sharing group, and just that's the kind of thing where, I mean, it's bad to be the first one hit. It's really bad to be the eighth one hit, where it's there's been an announcement, there's been a patch, there's been news about something, and because you're not paying attention, you get hit with something that maybe you should have been aware of, and there were some simple ways that you could have avoided it.
Yeah, and look, we haven't seen it yet, but to that point is, are you and kind of cover this in all bit parts, but reasonable security measures? Are you paying attention? At what point can you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, when you're like, well, okay, this is a known patch for a year and there's tons of news articles out about this. And at what point are plaintiffs' attorneys or a state regulator with things like CCPA coming online aim the guns at you and to say, hey, look, you should have known better? There's going to be some kind of monetary damages to the fact that you just willfully ignored things that were out there. So again, you don't want to be that person that just feigns ignorance. You just don't have that ability anymore.
Yeah, I think I've seen more and more of, as these longer breaches. Well, one of the things I really appreciate about GDPR is there really needs to be a need to really inform the proper authorities in the appropriate span of time, because I remember a time in the last year and a half where companies would, be breached, and then they would figure out that the breach was something simple, like a patch didn't get done on time, or even there's an AppGuard example where if you look up AppGuard and one of our customers, they had originally bought the software and it sat on a shelf, and they didn't get a time because of the resources were slightly busy. They didn't get time to download the software in time, and they actually got ransomware. Now, luckily for them, they were able to recover a lot of the funds, but it just goes back to both your points about, let's get the basics in place first. Let's get 80% of our challenges out of the way and get them mastered, and then we can handle the other 20% with high value, high knowledge subject matter experts who can help close those gaps in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and your consultants, whether that's law firms or cyber firms, whatever, should be able to tell you relatively quickly, like, where you're falling down compared to your peers. Right? It's very important to know, people, similar size organization in your industry are doing this, and this, and you're not, and that creates not just cyber risk, but it creates regulatory risk as well.
Yeah, I would encourage a lot of folks that if you've gotten a cyber insurance policy, is talk to your brokers, talk to your carrier about the types of legal counsel, forensic providers, different parts of people are on that panel, and then do what we just said. Go out, talk to them, find out what's going on in parts of the industry. Those of us who've been doing incident response long enough, it's you do like to get your weekends every now and then. So the more things that we can do to kind of do information sharing and tell people about those threats so we can spend weekends with our families as opposed in front of a computer, we're happy to do it. So it's really important to kind of, again, just continue to communicate with people about this. This is, again, about culture and changing behavior, but really understanding what these threats are to business, because, again, as we said earlier, it's not just an IT problem.
Right. So I got a couple more questions here, but I want to be conscious of everyone's time. Avi, any closing remarks or closing thoughts for folks on the phone?
What I'd say is, I mean, a lot of these things, like two-factor authentication, like encryption, like access controls, I mean, they're costly. They take a long time. People have been delaying implementing them, but the ratchet is only going one way, right? And so a lot of this stuff you're going to have to do if you haven't done it already, and you might as well do it sooner rather than later. And if you need support, you look to what your peers are doing, and And if you're falling behind, that should get you what you need internally to convince people that the resources need to be spent. But the further you fall behind on some of these basic things, the more risk you're carrying. And these are costs that you're going to have to spend eventually. So you might as well do them at a time when they're going to help you the most.
Doug, how about you?
Yeah, I would definitely say, as you, kind of, again, look at it from the perspective of cybersecurity is kind of like, you're part of building a program that is not just about getting to one hurdle. It's about continual improvement. So understand that you're going to have things happen in the environment, that bad things are going to happen. Understand what those threats are and have a good plan in place. We've seen more people really stumble on as their incident response is not having the proper resources in place or a way to deal with it. And so the longer your mean time to respond, mean time to detect, and any other KPIs that we want to throw around incident response, the longer that takes, the more it's going to hurt your business. So it's a lot of effort, but it's worth the investment and time to figure out what your incident plan and response is going to look like, that you have the right people in place, because you want to be able to get on an issue within a couple hours to a day as opposed to a week when the proverbial horses are out of the barn. So continue to look at the thing holistically throughout your environment where, okay, we have to constantly improve, but how are we going to constantly be better at our response as we do it?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for taking the time. Avi Gesser, Douglas Brush, thank you. Really appreciate your insight and your support on these webinars. And we've had you on a couple of these, and it's always a fantastic opportunity. So we'll be putting this out as a blog as well for folks so they can share it with their organizations. And real quick, Avi, Doug, what's the best way for folks to tap into your knowledge base if they want to stay in touch with you guys?
So Neil, thanks for having me. This is Avi Gesser. You can just find me. I'm Avi Gesser at my law firm's Debevoise, and you can find me on the website, and we're happy to help any way we can.
Great.
Sure. And again, if Doug Brush, and we're joking about social media promotion, yeah, I'm pretty easy to find if you do cybersecurity. And Doug Brush actually have a podcast up, cybersecurityinterviews.com, that has a wealth of information. We cover a lot of what we talked about today, just basics, how to build programs from security thought leaders. So that's a great way to find me, is cybersecurityinterviews.com.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate you both and appreciate your time. For everyone who dialed in, thank you for taking the time out of your day, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Yep. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Great. Thanks all.